I don't know, episode 9 or 10. And
Something like that.
we've been covering a lot of ground, but let's review at least a few of the running themes.
Yeah.
Because I want people to stay up with the vernacular we're using. We've got the problem of Moloch. 60 seconds. What's the problem of Moloch?
It's the impetus to compete in a way that actually hurts everybody involved.
But the problem of Moloch is that everyone has to compete or they lose in the short term, even though everyone's guaranteed to lose in the long term.
Right. So the problem of Moloch, as it applies to the atom bomb, for example, is teams of scientists and engineers, physicists in different countries around the world, all separately racing to build the most destructive weapon known to man. But it's because if they don't do that, they're not in the competition to protect themselves from the people who are competing to build the most destructive bomb. So we have to have one because they're going to get one. And so unless I'm building an atom bomb, I'm losing the game. So that's evidence of the problem of Moloch in the atom bomb.
So in
discovery.
in the Cold War, I grew up in the Cold War. It was called MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. And for the sake of easy numbers, America has 10 nuclear bombs and Russia has 11. So then America builds 4 more and we have 15. Russia says, well, we don't want to not have 15, so we're going to build 20.
Mm-hmm.
So now Russia has 20, America has 15, and it keeps going.
Yeah, and the problem is it's bad that anybody has one. It's bad that we all have one.
Bad that anybody has one.
Yeah.
But even though there reached a point, I don't remember what that point was, each side had 100 bombs. And you could essentially destroy the world many times over, cast the earth into a global nuclear furnace, nuclear winter, populations decimated, whatever. We've reached the point where it's already an existential threat to humanity, but we kept building bombs.
Because it would actually be worse if we didn't have bombs.
Right, because if you have 500 and I only have 200, you have a strategic advantage in the threat level.
Right.
And I can't, even though 200 bombs is bad, 500 is worse, I've got to have 500 if you have 500. Mm-hmm. Mutually assured destruction was the idea that by equally escalating the threat level, it made it so ridiculous and so absurd that no one would be willing to push the button. Mm-hmm. If each side only has 1, we're willing to push the button. If each side has 500, no one's willing to push the button. Mm-hmm. In that scenario, the problem of Moloch actually served as a deterrent because it was limited in its sphere of influence and highly stratified in who controlled it. Now we live in a world actually in the collapse of the former Soviet Union, the USSR, rogue nations got a hold of some of those weapons. It's actually more unstable in some ways with less bombs than it was with more bombs. But even that was just a glimpse of the problem of Moloch. The terms of the problem of Moloch in terms of AI and the game theory that posited that is it's so widespread, it's so ubiquitous, it's so favorable in most people's minds. I can type in a sentence and it'll make a photo of what I'm describing, and I don't have to pay a photographer $500 to go snap that photo. What's bad about that? And so it has trillions of dollars of potential on the economy. It offers me a bunch of personal convenience. It makes me an authority in areas I'm not an authority because I can just ask the little machine the question, and it processes trillions of data points for me. Mm-hmm. So the problem of Moloch is even more pronounced here because no one can afford to lose out in the short term on trillions of dollars of potential revenue, but everyone agrees it's hurtling towards unknown outcomes that are ultimately dangerous, reckless, and an existential threat to the definition of humanity.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone agrees that threat is as real as some people do.
Fair.
But people are willing to say, well, we're not really sure where it's headed. That's why we've got our ethics teams on board.
Right.
But I'm saying that is not sufficient.
So the problem of Moloch is that race to the bottom where everyone feels the pressure to stay in the race, even though many of them might be willing to pause and say, we're a little nervous about this. They can't afford to do that. They have to keep going, and the bottom is truly dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, that's the problem of Moloch in that application.
Okay, and the problem of Moloch in a spiritual sense is they're using a Canaanite deity, an ancient Canaanite deity that's mentioned in the Bible as who the generations would offer their children in sacrifice. It was a blood sacrifice of one generation to the next, to the god Moloch. It was the problem for us from a spiritual perspective is game theory. Who's the poet again? Allen Ginsberg, game theory, whatever. Why is this Canaanite deity's name poking through 3,000-4,000 years later? And yet, whatever Allen Ginsberg or game theory has said, it's interesting that it is using an ancient Canaanite deity that we would willingly sacrifice one generation to gain the favor of this deity in our generation.
Yeah.
And that is the Moloch problem for us.
Well, I mean, yeah, we're willing to be interested in that coincidence. I don't think we're supposed to be interested in it.
Right.
That's just the term.
Right.
It's like we're making much ado about nothing right now. But I don't think so.
So there's a technological problem with Moloch that everyone uses that vernacular. We're trying to at least recognize, like you just said, we're willing to be interested in the question of why is it actually named Moloch?
Yeah, I think what I specifically would say is you're going to have a hard time convincing me that that's not the same problem.
Right.
The problem of sacrificing to a deity is the way that this problem is being addressed. Like as an adjective, saying this using Moloch as an adjective to describe the problem is in effect a fitting application to the way that children were sacrificed to Moloch. It just sounds more primitive when you say child sacrifice, but when you think about the sacrifice is another term. I'm trying to write down what we're summarizing our concepts, and so far all we've done is talk about Moloch.
Right.
But
this is an important one to capture.
Yeah, I mean, sacrifice was another theme that we've been discussing because the nature of a sacrifice is something that has not changed over time, but our psychological understanding of a sacrifice has evolved or devolved, you could say, through the course of modern into postmodern thinking. So sacrifice tends to be something that people do. They do think of the Old Testament. Of
right.
Right. That's when a dove was slaughtered or a lamb was slaughtered. But a sacrifice is when you give up something that you possess to pay your respect to the higher power that you believe gave you the opportunity to possess in the first place. So when you give up to AI time with your child, right, answering a question that they brought to you because you're like, just Google it or like ask ChatGPT. I don't know. I don't have time to help you with your homework. I'm watching the game. That's a form of sacrifice because what could have been the moment shared and the knowledge gained in your input in the child's life, like you being the parent in that situation, what could have been gained from that interaction is now, from the child's perspective, being offered up to AI to receive the answer that they can't get from their parents. So what the parent is doing is saying, my relationship to you is not as important as what I'm doing. And so in the name of my better future, which is convenient, peaceful, less responsibility, I want my child to have more of a relationship with AI because it's not that big of a deal. It's hard to talk about this and not make it feel like small potatoes because we're just talking about kids using ChatGPT. But when a child reinforces the pattern of behavior, which says, I have a question, I know I'm going to get a better answer if I just go to AI, that's like consulting something that you don't understand rather than making a human relationship with your parent to get their wisdom and understanding. And I think the net effect of that is the sacrifice of human intellect, human consciousness into this non-organic system. something that's not alive, but we outsource our living creativity to a system that preys on us in the long run. The more that we engage in that, that to me is a form of sacrifice.
Okay, so let's.
I feel like that was confusing.
No, couple more terms. We have I'll call it the technological problem of Moloch, which is everything that AI represents in terms of technology, artificial intelligence, and the more general category of advanced technology, period. And all of the trade-offs we are making in our humanity in genetic engineering, CRISPR coming online, customizing humans, bionic technology, nanotechnology, all of the tampering with the DNA.
Yeah, those are all good examples.
All of that's not just AI, but AI is going to significantly multiply the potential of all those. So we have technology as a giant, this behemoth, leviathan entity that specifically in AI has certain outcomes, and all of that have problem of Moloch issues, the technology side. Then we have the cultural side of the implications of that. That's what you're talking about. Relationships, family dynamics, the value of a human, which starts to bleed over to the spiritual side, which is this whole crazy idea that we might be in a generation willing to sacrifice every future generation to that Molochian reality. And so now we have to ask the question, is it just a poetic name applied to this problem? Or is there really a spiritual power at work that's tipping its hand under the guise of technology to say, give me your children, give me every future generation, because I'm actually going to redefine humanity in the process.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a scary, so that's the big picture that we're working on week after week. Last week, we pulled in this idea of, what's the neuromorphic chips, which is literally taking pieces of our biological construct and welding it to a processor to gain the unique quantum mathematical and algorithmic power of the human brain in a processing environment that can begin to merge these realities. The metal mechanical world and the living biological world. And that's going to take the problem of Moloch to new dimensions, because now you are literally fusing the machine with the human and the human with the machine and setting it on course, more dominoes to fall so that, I don't know when, 3, 5 years, 10 years max, there's commercial applications that you can go to the Apple store and buy to interface yourself or to customize your child at birth so that they have the best advantages in life with a deep brain implant that is now, so hybridized at that point. We don't call it neuromorphic anymore. We just call it the new human. And so all of that's there. In theory, in principle, might still sound like science fiction, but you can start to see it. And couple more terms, idolatry, and you talked about sacrifice. The very real and ongoing threat of what we dismiss and overlook and kind of smirk at the ancient primitive people in their idol worship, and how we're too sophisticated for that. But these are really new, savvy, sophisticated, enlightened kinds of idol worship, because it's under the guise of technology and progress. It's not under the guise of worshiping some ancient spirit. This is progress. And so why wouldn't you bow down and accept that mark, accept that chip, accept that reality? And yet it is idol worship, sacrificing a generation to this unknown future.
Moloch, sacrifice, idolatry, responsibility, and then the element of integrity or sexual purity, you could call it. That's the way it's embedded in Leviticus is the the mention of Moloch and the command not to worship him is contained within the set of sexual purity laws in Leviticus, because it has there's that, as we mentioned before, the notion of sexual purity and the antithesis being fornication and promiscuity. That is something that is incessantly paralleled in the Bible with idolatry. When Israel goes astray, the the prophet speaks to Israel as the wanton harlot, the one playing the whore, the one who is fornicating with idols. And that wouldn't necessarily be purely poetic license, because there would tend to be, I don't know if this is exhaustively true, but like there's plenty of examples where there would be syncretism and there would be the allowance of indigenous peoples to continue practicing their worship, and so Israel would condone it or would integrate it into their own practice. That was where the sacrifice to Moloch originated from. It wasn't an Israelite practice, it was a Canaanite practice, but then Israelites adopted it because they wanted to have a better future.
Right.
And when you sacrifice to Moloch, you have a better future. It's a fertility god.
Right.
So you're thinking, I am giving a better future by sacrificing my child. So that's why it's interesting that we talk about Moloch being an influence in AI. I mean, we being Sam Altman, Mark Zuckerberg, like these people know that name and address that problem forthrightly in interviews, because it is a problem, but it's kind of whitewashed or like bleached into feeling like, yeah, it's not really a deity, it's not really like a living problem, it's just kind of inherent to competition. We're just dealing with it as ethically as we can.
It's a rubric for them. It's a schema to talk about the issue. It's just a name that identifies the problem. But we're asking the question, what is the problem behind that problem?
Why is that an emergent feature of idolatrous activity?
Right.
That the thought of sacrificing your child to it becomes, in your head, logical, rational, reasonable. Well, we're going to the Valley of Hinnom to sacrifice our children to the god Moloch so that we'll have better crops the following year. And so you're thinking, well, but the crops are to feed your family, right? And so what if you have less family to feed? Then you need less crops. So like, what's the net gain here? But you're definitely going to sacrifice your kid. So you're not, but you can't really question the logic. You just have to know, like, yeah, but that's the ritual. When we give that up, we believe we get a better future. So I think that's what's happening when we outsource responsibility to AI. What we're saying is, hey, this is more than I can bear. You make this a better future for me, and then I will wait for that to happen.
I think it was Herodotus who described in Carthage, it wasn't just in Israel. That was the Phoenician culture that Israel was influenced from, and they did syncretize and co-opt.
Mm-hmm.
But they found mass graves, and Herodotus described the ritual of the sacrifice to Moloch. And what was interesting, you said a couple of things. Number one, I mean, it's horrific to even describe or to contemplate, but obviously you heat up this giant bronze statue and you place your living child into the burning furnace, onto the scalding metal hands or into the bowels of it. And the child is going to scream, and any reasonable parent is going to be plagued with torment and guilt at doing this. So what did they do? They turned it into a raucous celebration, and they would have trumpets and horns and pounding drums to drown out the screams of the dying sacrificed children. And you see a proxy for this in the wild celebration around AI. It's like, this is so good. Let's figure it out along the way. We can answer all the questions. Let's not get bogged down too much with the ethics boards and the restraints, because whoever controls this is really going to control more and more of the future of the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's too much money. There's too much potential. We can solve disease. We can get to Mars. We can colonize the galaxy. We can all this stuff. We can liberate ourselves from manual labor. The robots and the AI can do it. We can get a guaranteed income, blah, 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 blah. And culture itself is pounding the drums and blowing the horns while we bury our children in the fires of this thing.
Yeah, well, metaphorically.
Right.
Right. So as far as the metaphor goes, yes, it seems like that's what the war drums are beating on is the furthering of AI. But I don't think it's clear why that's a sacrifice. Do you feel like we've
Help
un-
me.
I think it's confusing because
You're a young father. Talk about it personally with your daughter.
yeah, for me to imagine ignoring her when she's coming to me with questions or needing help with homework, or she's just been alone in her room for a couple hours as a teenager, so I like go in there and she's just got like VR goggles on and is typing to somebody. For me to open that door and just be like, oh hey sweetie, just checking on you, and then leave, it's like what am I catching her doing? Like I'm literally catching her living an alternate reality that I have no clue what it is. Unless I like put on the goggles and see what she's looking at, unless I read through her chat history. But you can't even see the video history. It's
Okay,
we're just
but wait a second, because I really want to do this, and maybe personalizing it isn't helpful. But this idea of sacrifice, I think, is somewhat intangible to a lot of people, especially when there's so many potential benefits and the progression is gradual enough. Because everything you
mm,
just described, I lived with you texting,
mm,
right?
yeah.
I mean, just from a dumb phone to a smartphone,
Mm,
and that thing that parents of my age had with kids of their age. So from the 90s into the 2000s, the technology itself is much more primitive, but some of the dynamics were the same. Of what are you doing on your phone? What are
mm,
you looking at? What
mm.
So why does a pair of goggles on an alternate world? Why is that significantly worse? Is it significantly worse? Is it just another form of the same problem? And you go all the way back to the caveman teenager, and he's, pounding the letter to his girlfriend on a clay tablet and sending it on a
Yeah.
donkey a mile across the
Yeah.
canyon.
Well, I think part of what makes it different is the ingredients and the psychoactive effect that they have. Like there is a categorical difference between smoking a cigarette, smoking a joint. You're smoking, maybe smoking isn't great, but like one is gonna hit you very different than the other one. And so
In
you
between a joint and meth.
yeah, I mean, very different effects. So, like a cigarette is it's not good for you, but it's not going to immediately and irreversibly damage you the way that smoking meth would.
Yeah,
So
it's a slow kill versus a psychedelic
the
experience that's
stakes are higher.
addictive, that's a gateway, all the way to an instant addiction that can literally cost you your life.
The stakes are higher.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with virtual reality goggles and you're dealing with uh these like AI chat rooms where like you can literally just talk to an AI, the the parent of that child cannot understand, like they can't even empathize with how engrossing that experience is. It's an even though right now it's kind of sticky and glitchy, and like you put it on and you feel, I mean you can tell like okay this is all animated and it's kind of blocky, and there's constant reminders that you're in an alternate reality, but when you want to be there, you're willing to focus your attention on what's working and ignore the signs that this isn't really real. And so the more time that you spend familiarizing yourself with that process, and you reinforce that concept in your head, it's different than texting, because it's different. Like texting is different than being a pen pal. You're at least you're like practicing uh, your handwriting. You at least are improving penmanship and using vocabulary and structuring sentences, organizing thoughts, and then mailing the letter. Maybe you do that all in secret, but that's not inherently inhuman activity. Texting is already kind of weird because it's like it is happening in a private way, but sometimes you can have the phone that like allows the parent to see if they want, or they can just take the phone and see. But you can still like scrub your text so that certain ones aren't. But now when you're doing it with augmented reality or with VR or with an AI chatbot, those are happening in a way that is not comparable to just texting. Because with the AI, for example, you're not talking to somebody, but you feel like you're talking to
Right.
somebody. So the answers that you get, you personify the source, which is a very dangerous mechanism to to settle on in your head. We shouldn't be personifying machines.
Right.
It's one thing to be like fond of your sports car, but this is like I'm literally talking with it,
Right.
and it's talking
And
back
getting
to me.
answers to life.
Yeah, it's like the
from it.
Black Mirror episode, the one with Miley Cyrus.
Right.
Where you showed me that one.
Yeah,
Yeah, where it's like the doll learns you and starts to suggest certain ideas. It's like that is what we're working on.
Right.
And then there's the VR component, which could be something that you engage with in a virtual reality setting. These are just things that parents aren't knowing that that's online for their kid.
Well, so let's up the stakes though, because even what you've said is still somewhat vague. It's a frog in the pot. It's all on a continuum still. I don't know that we've gone from cigarette to meth in this, because at the underlying it all is the fundamental value of a human, the imago Dei, versus a chemical meat bag. Because if we're all just chemical meat bags, then I text, I carve on a clay tablet 2,000 years ago, or I put on goggles. It's not a fundamental violation of an essential dignity. It's just new conveniences and innovations on the journey, not so much of humanity, but of an evolved species that is still evolving. And so
transhumanism,
right. And so that next level of evolution may actually be a welcome step if there's not something more elegant and divine to protect and what that is threatening to erase. So it's not just that she puts on the goggles, it's that she can choose her identity. She can choose to be a 25-year-old man, or she can choose to be a dolphin. And we do that to some degree when we read a favorite novel and we project into that story and become it. But it's one thing to use the faculties of the imagination,
right,
which are part of the human mix,
Yeah.
the imago Dei. It's another to project outside of myself and have the machine project back to me, this is who you are.
Well, because you don't use your imagination when you use VR. You just look with your eyes, and you're like, "This is the
You
world."
program
around me.
in, this is who I want to be.
That's why it's so unsettling. Like when you do the game where you've got to like walk, and it feels like because you're looking down and you're really high up, you literally feel like you're gonna fall down.
Right.
But you can tell yourself, "No, I'm just walking on the even ground." But it doesn't matter what you tell yourself. You feel very concerned.
Oh, I'll embarrass myself here, but that VR experience, I was in New York City with Evan. We went to one of those. I put on the goggles, and on the ground in the studio, on the ground is just about a 10-foot 2x6 plank like you would buy at Lowe's. But it's coordinated with the VR experience. So I put on the goggles, and in the scenario, I step into an elevator, and I have the
that's the
feeling
one
of
I'm thinking of. Yeah.
going up 100 stories. So my brain is being immersed into this world that, although I'm not moving, my brain is 100 stories. And the elevator doors open, and now I am looking at that same plank that's sitting on the ground in New York City, but in the VR world, it's extending out 100 stories over New York in the open void. I got a thing for heights. Now, in my brain, I am thinking the entire time, I know where I am. I'm on the ground. I could move around here. I'm not in an elevator. That board, if I fall off that board, I just fall 2 inches to the ground. My brain is so convinced by what I'm seeing, and I've got a thing for heights, I couldn't get out of the elevator. I literally couldn't get out of the elevator. There's a video of an old guy on Facebook now. He's literally crawling on the ground trying to do what I did. I had to ask the guy in the room. I just talked into the room. I said, "Hey, help me, hold my hand. I can't do this." He had to come and take my hand and stabilize me because the world was so immersive. Now, this is primitive compared to the power of what is being unleashed. That's technology from 5 years ago. So the world is so immersive, it literally redefines your reality. And now our kids are having their reality redefined, their preferences redefined, their personality redefined, and they can interact with all of their peers who are redefining their reality. And so nobody has objective reality that they're drawing on, but that world is increasingly more fascinating and compelling and interesting than this world. So biologically, we're changing our DNA. Technologically, we're creating an interface between brain matter and computer processors. And on our interior world, we're increasingly more compelled by an alternate reality. And that is a sacrifice of a generation to an unknown future. We've never had a generation cross that line and figure out how to build civilization or continue civilization with that dynamic.
Yeah, and I think that's a grammatic leap that we're trying to make, is to say that's the sacrifice unto Moloch, because we're saying that's the name that's given to the impetus, which is furthering this industry. Where it's like Moloch compels us forward.
Right.
That's the gist of what Sam Altman says. That's the gist of what Zuckerberg says. So it's not just them saying it. I'm sure that that's what everybody acknowledge, whatever word they have for it. They're saying, unless we're on the bleeding edge of this technology, increasing exponentially as fast as we possibly can, then we're not competing the way that our shareholders want us to compete in the market. Like, we're not viable unless we're on the bleeding edge. And so that means we have to supercharge AI with everything we possibly can. Maybe taking the time to like ethically review our decision making along the way, like not in a way that is appropriate. It's the scientists and the engineers are way out in front of the culture, and then the legislators are way behind the culture. So we could finally have the technology that is like smoking meth for kids, and then that gets adopted widely, and then there would be a bill introduced in the New Hampshire House. It's like,
Right.
Well, maybe we should limit certain aspects. It's just, there's no way to legislate this at the speed that it's going to. So I'm not saying we need to have some tyrannical, oppressive force of government that locks it all down. There's no way to stop it, because China's
That's
working
Moloch.
on it, Russia's working on it, India's working on it, France is working on it. Everybody's working on it. So if we're not working on it, we're not competing. And then within America, if a company is not working on it as fast as OpenAI, then they're not competing.
And so AI and all these the technology we're talked about are kind of built on personal computer revolution that turned into the information and social media revolution. But scientists were already starting to ask, what is all the pressure of Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, that constant dopamine hit, the pressure, the depression and anxiety that young girls feel based on the sexualization of all of it? How is that actually rewiring the brain? We don't have the answers to that, because this is the guinea pig generation. Actually, millennials and Gen Z were the guinea pig generation for that. Gen Alpha are going to be native to that, and we don't even know what that has done. And Gen Alpha is going to have the goggles, and what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to answer the question when Izzy says, Dad, my friend, they don't have goggles anymore. They're getting surgery for an implant on their eyes where they can just activate the alternate world anytime they want. And none of the cool kids have goggles anymore. And she's 7 years old.
Well, the thing that was effective about the Matrix analogy, I think, of why you need to take the psychedelic pill to wake up, is because that's what it's going to feel like for a child that grows up from the toddler years, just immersed in that technology. Why would you ever choose to leave that construct? You don't even think it's a construct. You're just like, I'm just living my life. I'm playing with my friends. So you have to imagine somebody who has the time to grow up when VR is a household item, and not just like the rich kids have it and they have the best one. It's like when it becomes a household, I don't know when that's going to be. Timeline doesn't really matter. It's going to happen. So then there will be children who grow up only knowing the application of that technology as like when you had a phone and you had a TV and it was just always there, except now it's like I'm always plugged in. So why would you then, as an adult who's working a job that requires you to be plugged in, why would you fundamentally reconsider that? It's too fundamental. And that's why you have to like take the metaphorical pill, is like you have to want to wake up in a different world.
Right.
And unless you're willing to do that, which now that's the ultimate sacrifice. That's like that's the call
Right.
of Abraham is like leave your father's tent.
Right.
And maybe you're going to be that old.
So the sacrifice is in one direction or the other, but there will be a sacrifice.
You're gonna make Peterson said that recently, and with it stuck with me. He was like, "You're gonna make a sacrifice." It doesn't. I think he was using the context of like being vegan or eating meat, but he was like, even if you're vegan, you're still gonna have to sacrifice some living organic thing to fuel you. So no matter what, you're making a sacrifice.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that is a scalable theorem.
Right.
At any category of life, at any micro or macro analysis, you are making a sacrifice in the name of a better future. So now, do you choose which God you are sacrificing to? And maybe you don't. Maybe you say, I don't want to think about that.
Right. I'd rather have the trumpets and the drums.
Yeah.
Because either we're making a choice that is increasingly harder for parents to make because there's so much pressure for your kids to have every advantage that this technology offers. And kids, by definition, want to be equal to their peers. And so they've got their own Moloch issue of keeping up with the peer pressure of all the technology that's being put in front of them that is fundamentally redefining the human experience and the sacrifice of civilization in that direction. Or as parents and children, you make a sacrifice to live outside of that world and you forego the benefits and the privileges. And now we're in this strange world that has actually been prophetically described in scripture of days that are coming where you might not be able to buy or sell if you don't play the game.
Yeah, I mean, we can see it. We can imagine without even having to create a fake scenario. We can realistically imagine the way that you can now pay with your palm in Whole Foods.
Right.
Like that's what happens when the people who implement that technology also have access to the way that government security cameras micromanage. I mean, I'm just describing China, but
Right.
imagine it in America.
Right.
Why wouldn't it happen here when we're also interested in the technology?
Yeah.
Like, why would there be just this like awesome wise old man scientist that made this palm reader, and he just is like, I just love people. I just want to live a more convenient life. I don't want to know what you're doing. I just want it to be faster for you to pay because a credit card's not fast enough.
Yeah.
It's just you have to be very naive to assume that the impetus behind these technological advances is for the betterment of society.
Right.
Because what is the betterment of society? Some people think the betterment of society is less people being alive.
Right.
One of them runs the World Economic Forum.
Right.
So how naive do you want to be about it?
So every advance creates a convenience that we have to be willing to be inconvenienced from and forsake the advancement to retain something fundamental about what it means to be human. Because every one of these is a trade-off for the sake of convenience, a trade-off of, in just millimeters, just smudges of space and color and grayness that can easily be rationalized and justified. But if you don't have a high value for what it means to be human and the sovereignty of human free will and the sovereignty of human the essential human dignity, then trading those things, those privileges of humanity away for the conveniences these offer, it doesn't seem like a sacrifice. It seems like progress.
Well, yeah, you're increasing yourself. That's the thought. Is like which is what you do when you sacrifice your children to Moloch. Is you're like, I'm actually increasing myself because I'm going to have a more fertile future because I'm making the sacrifice.
Right.
So you feel the weight of the sacrifice, but you know it's giving you a better future. Here we're still doing the sacrifice, but we're doing it in what feels like psychological nanometers compared to what was like, I'm literally putting my child into the fire. Now it's like, I'm just updating my phone to the latest iOS. And we don't think that that is going to further draw us into the construct, as the Matrix calls it. We just think, well, that's the new one.
Right.
So when all of our technology it's not worth telling the story, but I'm just thinking about how even TVs are like, it used to be like, turn it on, pick the channel, that was a TV. And now there's 100 buttons on a TV. And some of them are color-coded, and some of them I've never seen before. And some of them don't do what I think they would do. And there's 4 inputs on the TV because it's not just a TV. So
And 500 channels, and you thumb through them and can't find a single one you're interested in.
you can't just get what you want. I,
Yeah.
I had to get for school. I was like, I just want to have my own laptop for school to keep everything organized. So I go to Target and I'm like, I literally need to take notes on a laptop. I don't even care if it's connected to the internet. It's just for like papers and stuff. But he's like, well, yeah, they all are connected to the internet. And like, here's one. And he points out a $600 one. And I'm like, I just want the cheapest one, just the bare minimum, like a Chromebook. Just I'll do email and notes, and that's all I need. And he was like, why would you want a Chromebook? Well, I guess here's this one, and it was like $200 on sale. I was like, that's still really expensive for a computer that just does email and notes. But like, okay, that's the cheapest one. And he was like, you should not get this computer. It does nothing. And I was like, I know, that's the point. I only wanted to do the bare minimum. And he was like, no, it can't even do the bare minimum. Like, it's so glitchy. And I was like, I'll figure it out. And he was right. It's actually really terrible. So I paid $200 for a terrible computer that barely works, but it does what I wanted to do. But that's where we're at, is the cheap computer now is more expensive than the expensive computer used to be. And it still is so bad that it's like, why would you even spend money on that? Just buy a $600 computer that at least does that task better.
Yeah.
So why there's a new iPhone every year.
Yeah.
That's why there's a new tablet every year, because everything that we have needs to continue increasing so that it becomes not backwards compatible. So everything just has to keep going. So there's no way to like just have what you want. You have to have what you're sold. And
Right.
there isn't a consumer response to that rat race. It's like, I don't know if rat race is a good word for that there, but there's no consumer demand for a Stone Age product.
Right.
There's no consumer demand for a dumb phone unless you're like trying to get into
Right.
trouble.
Right.
The consumer demand is like, I want the shiny thing. That's a cool feature. Oh, the camera is better. Oh, this has the apps built into the TV. That's what consumers want. So there isn't enough people that are like, that's too much. We just want baseline technology. That's good enough for us.
Now, you and I have talked about, and I want to address it here because I'm going back to something you said earlier. In the Bible, it talks about the Topheth, which was the statue of Moloch in the Valley of Hinnom. And you and I have talked about, I need to put 2 or 3 pieces on the board, then I'll connect them. Essentially, the more we talk, offline and on camera, the more alarmed we are. That's the nature of conversations like this. I admit there's a certain psychological, setting our hair on fire. I get that. But there's also, to the degree that even 50% of what we're saying is legitimate. Let's say you and I are half crazy, but the other half is prophetic, insightful, predictive, concerning, whatever the terms might be. Let's say that half of this is garbage. What do we do with the other half?
Mm-hmm.
Because the other half is concerning enough that it imposes itself with questions. What are we going to sacrifice? Which way are we going to fall in this equation? And to answer that is to propose solutions that increasingly sound Luddite and, anti-technology, move to the woods,
Yeah, because then it's like the consequence of that is then, okay, maybe that's what's logical, is like we need the life in the woods, but then you're gonna run into some white separatists out there,
Right.
that are like, hey brother, we've been out here a long time, welcome to the fold.
Right.
I'm like, I do not want to be a part of your
Right.
So how can I not go that far, but how can I kind of move out of the city?
But
like,
it is interesting.
where are the suburbs?
You see the homesteading movement, you see the tiny house and the simple life, that as life gets crazier and crazier, people that aren't even concerned about AI, they're just like, I just want to feel more connected to the land, live off grid, be outside of the government's ever-present watchful social metrics that are, whatever it is, however conspiratorial or simple the motivation, you do see this kind of countercultural movement where people are like, I want to get out of debt. I want to live simply. I want to know how to garden. I don't want my tomatoes to come from a can.
Yeah.
Unless I'm the one that put them in the can.
Right.
And so there's already kind of a Luddite movement in society, however small it is. There's plenty of primitive societies like the Amish and the Mennonite that are it's not just the white separatists. They're
They're noble. Yeah.
we could cross the street from the white separatists, and the Amish could welcome us into the. I mean, there's plenty of.
We'll never hear that joke. So.
But there's plenty of groups that are just young 20-somethings that are like, I want to live simply. So you can have that conversation without having the AI conversation, is my point.
Yeah.
But
we're new to the conversation, if that's what you mean.
We're talking in such a way, though, that to make a choice, to make a decision for your children, for our grandchildren, for our family, it's like, okay, we actually have to start choosing some things.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to live in a place where we could grow something if we wanted to? Are we going to live in a place where we kind of create a culture of turning off our computers more than having them on, where there's a certain threshold beyond which we just aren't going to get that update or that upgrade or engage in that new technology?
Yeah.
We're still going to be involved in a reasonable amount, and reasonable is going to shift for different people.
Yeah, but you can't. I think in many categories you can't say, okay, this is as far as I go technologically. Like if you want to be on Instagram, you can't use the outdated Instagram version. Any application will reach the point where it's like, this is no longer supported. You need to update.
Right. Within 5 years, generally, you got to do that.
Oh yeah, even shorter than that.
Yeah.
It's like 2 years.
Yeah.
Like because I'm not on social media anymore, but so I'll get links from people and I won't be allowed to access the link. Like it will literally load a blank page on my phone.
Right.
And I was like, what? Why can't I just see it's online?
Right.
But it's because I don't have an account.
Right.
So unless I am plugged in, I'm not allowed to participate in that part of society.
Right.
So the internet is becoming increasingly what's the term, like a gated community.
Yeah.
It's like unless you live here, you're not allowed to enter here. But then to live there, I have to have all of this. I have to allow my information to go to the organizations that may or may not be selling that to third parties, that may or may not be selling that to the government.
Right.
I'm not allowed to know.
Right.
I'm just supposed to be naive about it and be like, I'm just online. Like
Right.
I'm just on Instagram. I'm just doing my thing.
Okay, but I still want to. I'm going somewhere.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm admitting that we could sound more conspiratorial, more crazy, the bolder and more direct we are at trying to tackle this.
Yeah.
It's like we can't just keep it in the abstract realm. At some point, the abstractions become, what are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And to talk about what are we going to do sound half crazy. But, and I don't have the answers to that. You don't have the answers to that. We're kind of fumbling our way through that. What my point is, though, as believers in a spiritual community called the church that is supposed to be more of heaven than of earth, but living on earth, and more heavenly minded, if you will.
Sure.
A city whose builder and maker is God. That's the sacrifice Abraham made, was to pursue something out of a pagan, idolatrous culture that was faithful to God alone. And the whole idea as believers, as Jesus followers, is that we are called out. You can apply that on so many levels, but we're called out, and we live called out. And Christianity, by and large, is meant to be a countercultural movement.
Yeah.
And so now, the more AI presses in, the more culture conforms, and the more the church leverages this in our own lives and corporately. I'm just reminded of that, of the stories. You had the Temple on the Mount, which was the tangible presence of God and the most unique identifying characteristic of the Jewish nation. This temple where God himself dwelt. And you could stand on that mountain and just look. I've been there. You can just look just right across the valley. And so King David and King Solomon, who were involved in the construction of this edifice of national pride and this spiritual epicenter of the world, and out of that very place, those same people, Solomon, built that statue just within an hour's walk. You could see it just down in the valley. You go up and worship Yahweh here, and then you go down into the valley and sacrifice your kids down there. And it was all in the same capital city, the same uh, spiritual epicenter of the chosen nation who were called out among all the nations.
Yeah, and let's use that as a macrocosm of what goes on individually within our personality, within our psychology, our own individual psychology. Each person has the place where they go to worship the highest ideal in certain moments, and then in other times they have the place where they go down low to worship a lower ideal because it feels right in that moment. So what we're called to do as individuals is become the tabernacle,
Wow.
to honor the Lord in
Yeah.
ourselves and all of our actions, taking all of our thoughts captive, doing everything in the right spirit. And I don't think the AI furthers that. I
Right.
don't think that consulting Chat GPT is me going up to the mountain to worship God. I think it's me thinking, what's the easier way? But I don't think that's a Bible story. I don't think there's somebody who God came and said, hey, there's an easier way. Come over here and serve me.
Right.
All of the stories are like, you're not going to want to hear this, but you have to come up here and serve me.
Right.
But then the faithful people are like, yes, you're right.
But the problem is, as you're saying at a personal level, the man who built the temple also built the Topheth to Moloch. The man who built it and saw the power of God come, and the people were overawed at his tangible presence so they couldn't even stand. Years later, he goes down into that valley, and under the pressure of other relationships and culture and beneficial mergers and diplomatic relations with other nations and this, that, and the other, he says, we're also going to have this. And they're living in proxy to one another.
Talking about Solomon?
Solomon.
Yeah.
Solomon built the temple and he built the statue to Moloch, and they were within a stone's throw of each other.
I didn't know he was the one that built Moloch, but he was licentious. Like he was always consorting with foreign women. And then they would pressure him with their gods. He'd be like, yeah, bring him in.
Which is the interesting thing you brought up out of the warnings against Moloch are set in the passage related to sexual purity.
Right. I mean, even just from a lens of textual criticism, like not having a spiritual bent, that motif co-occurs in the narrative. There's idolatry and there's sexual immorality. Those are concurrent motifs. You don't have one without the other. I don't think in a way that I can't say exhaustively they always co-occur. It
Right.
just seems to me like way more often than not, there's literally idolatry and there's literally fornication. And then it's helpful to say, look, this is happening because this is happening. It's almost like the quantum.
And almost every
of the
passage
two.
where the Lord warns against, he talks about his jealousy and his anger over the idolatry. It is in, it has a sexual kind of language to it. The idea of jealousy is romantic jealousy because the idolatry represents unfaithfulness.
Yeah.
But now take that picture that you just said, we're the tabernacle. The church is the living stones of the presence of God. And individually and corporately, though, we live in a culture where just down in the valley of our own soul, I can pull out my phone and I've got Topheth right there. My grandson asks for an answer and I go, here, look it up, because I'm busy doing this. Whatever that is, however expeditious that seems in the moment, and I don't know the answer, and Google does. And so I'm willing to divorce my humanity from his need.
Yeah.
He gets trained to the machine more than to me. And
yeah,
I'm trying to use that as a metaphor for all of the ways that we tolerate the proximate reality that is increasing, and yet we don't feel the cognitive dissonance that we should. These are two radically opposed realities, Moloch and Yahweh.
Yeah, I think part of what we're saying that we haven't really labeled is this dilemma between hospitality and sociopathy. Sociopathic behavior is antisocial behavior. It's when I remove myself, I isolate myself, I break unspoken rules. I do that because that's what I would prefer to do in the moment. Is I don't want to strengthen the social bond in that moment. I actually want to dissolve or weaken the social bond that I have. And then hospitality is the opposite. It's like I actually want to give up what I would prefer for the sake of making somebody else feel comfortable, for strengthening the social bond. Hospitality is definitely a big motif in the Old Testament in particular, I would say. when you have the like, here, look it up online, or go play with your friends online, or here, I just bought you VR for Christmas, use it as much as you want, only use it 3 hours a day, whatever it is. That's all fueling sociopathic behavior because it's withdrawing the individual from society. So when I'm sitting in my house and I put on a VR headset and start playing a game, I am purposefully disconnecting myself from every social relationship in the house. I'm doing that on purpose because I'd rather have more fun. So now I'm recalibrating my hedonistic tendencies to be sociopathic, like
Wow.
clinically by definition.
Wow.
So that is going to
What a statement.
reduce. I'm going to reduce my ability to be hospitable, which means I'm reducing my ability to be Abrahamic. That was the man that offered in hospitality, the servant of the Lord, who was like, "No, I have to go on my way," and he's like, "No, come and eat. No,
Right.
I'm not gonna. No, come, come."
Right.
He's like politely, respectfully enforcing hospitality.
There's like an SNL skit in there somewhere where Abraham's got his goggles on.
God
just comes walking
right
by.
knocks on the tent. He's just like,
Yeah. But okay.
Story ends.
But yeah,
The
you
book could
just
be a
see
lot shorter.
Sodom burning.
The book could be a lot shorter.
But help. What you just said was profound. But I still
I didn't mean to rush past it.
No,
yeah.
I still want to get a hold of this. Cognitive dissonance is a state that is inherently unraveling to the human psyche.
Mhm.
It's why
By
we can't
definition,
stay there.
Yeah.
The two opposing states are in conflict enough. We can't bear the tension over a sustained period of time, so we choose one side or the other. We rarely reconcile two opposing sides. We choose one or the other because they're dissonant and we don't like the dissonance. But this is creating a dissonance that we're getting comfortable with. We've got the temple on the mountain that we go to on Sunday, and then we go down into the valley for 6 days and kneel at the altar of Moloch with technology. And these are two spiritual, they may not be cognitive dissonant yet. And that's actually, this is helpful just even talking about it. Part of why I think we are having this conversation is because Moloch is whispering at a frequency that isn't triggering cognitive dissonance in society. And so people are living with a divided heart, divided loyalties, and they're making these sacrifices and they don't even know it, or they would be dissonant. But there's not yet the awareness of the choices that are being made because it's the frog in the pot, and every upgrade is just incremental. You don't jump from OS 5 to OS 25. You go 5 to 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and then finally just to 6. And we've been incrementally upgrading all of this technology, all of the social media constructs, all of the, to a point now that we're so acclimated, we go between the temple and Topheth and Moloch multiple times, every day, every week. But there needs to be a spiritual dissonance where we start to get uncomfortable with that. We start to be bothered by that. If even half of this conversation is true, there needs to be more spiritual dissonance in the only entity on the planet that is capable of describing the Imago Dei in a way that is meaningful and living out that value system and being the habitation of God and the countercultural called out entity that says we aren't just going to head like lemmings off the cliff.
I think there's a very boring response when you try to disconnect. Like, there's a better way to say that. The feeling of boredom is avoided like the plague.
Right.
In modern society. So when I imagine if somebody is on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, just to use those 4 examples, and most of the interactions that they have are through DMs and through sharing memes, to imagine just canceling all social media, like not just deleting the app, but like choosing to deactivate the account permanently and then deleting the app.
Right.
That's going to feel neurologically like a type of social death.
Right.
It's going to feel like I'm committing social suicide.
Yeah, that's like if the parent takes the child's phone and they scream and cry because they're grounded for a week
Yeah.
and they feel disconnected,
Yeah.
divorced from their friends, unfairly punished. And that was with a dumb phone with the TTY
Yeah.
texting, much less the smartphone, much less VR.
Yeah, because you're like, I'm literally with my friend. I'm talking to them right now. So
Right.
I'm gonna look stupid. I'm gonna have to tell them what happened. It's embarrassing. So to say I'm going offline, that I've found people saying like, oh yeah, I'm not online anymore, and like they literally are online. They just mean, oh, I only check it once a day or something.
Right.
But they're like, but I'm not crazy like other people
Right.
because we don't have a concept of offline. Unless you imagine the Luddite culture or the Amish or
Right.
the noble savage who just lives off and nobody knows their name.
Right.
So we don't have an opportunity to be like a community offline because we use technology to reinforce the community. So like if I'm planning a party, I can't just wait to tell people in person the party's happening. I have to DM them. I have to call them. I have to text them. I have to use the technology to engage with them socially because there are no expected gathering places where I just know I'm going to see them on Tuesday because we always do that. The only time it happens, I think, is like the Sunday church service. You know that's where people are going to be there, but then you still don't expect attendance. It's like, oh, good, you're here too. Because maybe you're sick or maybe you're tired. It's like we can have excuses that prevent us from going to church. It's not like you have to go, otherwise it's going to look weird. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there aren't enough extant social opportunities that it's expected I am supposed to be here because otherwise people are going to be concerned about me. No, it's like I'm texting someone, hey, are you going to church today? I'm texting on my way to church.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to church. Okay, I'll see you there. But it's we use technology to reinforce the social bond even when we're going to meet in person.
Right.
So it really would require this red pill
Oh, it's radical.
rewiring.
It's
Yeah.
radical.
Which is why it's hard to talk about without sounding radical because it's only going to become increasingly the what's the word like the requisite buy-in, the what's required of you to participate in society will become increasingly technologically facilitated,
Right.
and the scale of technological development is exponential. So there will be jobs in the future that you can only do with your VR.
Right. Right.
So then I'm alienating myself from whatever that piece of the pie is in the job market if I'm not willing to use VR. It's like I worked as a hiring manager and I would see folks that would come in that didn't know how to use computers. And so they had to get the lowest paying job because they could only do like assembly line work, but they couldn't even fill out the application because we wouldn't print them off a form. It's like it's all online in the database.
Right.
So I would have to literally help them fill out an application just to work a minimum wage job at an assembly plant.
Right.
So that's an example of how the technology is getting to a point where it's forming this caste system based on your integration with technology. And the people who are at the pinnacle are the people that are computer scientists, that are working in Silicon Valley, that are developing AI. Those are the people who are actually like, they have job mobility. They can go left and right. They can go up and down. The people at the bottom are honest, hardworking people that don't know how to use a computer. Right. And they're at the bottom of society because they have to be there. They can't engage with society. Right. Society is now, there's like an equal sign between status and tech savviness. Yeah. You just have to have that.
And the severity you're describing there, that idea that taking the red pill really is, it's paradigm shifting, it's lifestyle shifting, it's because what you see as the watered down version of that is the person that will kind of, whether braggingly or not, they'll say, I'm going to go offline for a week. You know, they'll make their announcement on Facebook. I'm taking a social media break or whatever it is.
Because it would look weird if you just did it.
Right.
You got to announce it.
Right. And so they do that for a week or a month, or this idea of the dopamine fast.
Yeah.
You know, where you're kind of recalibrating your brain, your neurology in that respect.
Which we can't tell kids to do Lent, but it's good to do a dopamine fast.
Right.
Okay.
But my point is that the very fact that they will do that for a week or a month proves that they can't consider anything more than that.
Uh-huh.
The idea of I'm going to make this huge social statement.
Yeah.
To the world and for myself is For some, I think they're really grappling with this is a stressful way to live.
Mm,
It's ultimately not satisfying. Jeannie just got off social media entirely, canceled the accounts, deleted it because it's that time suck.
mm,
There's the stress, the pressure, all of that, and so we can all identify with that semi-luddite call
mm-hmm,
to the wilderness, where it's
mm-hmm.
like, oh, thank God, I get to go on vacation, turn my phone off.
That's like the wilderness of the porch.
Right,
Just
right.
stepping that far outside.
Yeah, but we can recognize that because it's like I the moment I contemplate it, I realize the stress I'm about to be delivered from
Mm-hmm,
and the liberty of
mm-hmm.
not having to carry that. But I'm only going to do that for a week. Or I'm only going to do that for a month
Well, yeah.
because the red pill of a lifetime of not doing that is now practically inconceivable.
It's kind of like uh trying to wean off something you're addicted to. So like if you're drinking, because there are people that do this, they'll drink a bottle of hard liquor a day.
Mhm.
So it's trying to say like, hey, you should for 2 or 3 days pretty much not drink anything. But like you can have a couple of drinks, but just don't drink anything. And then when you come back, just do like half a bottle a day.
Right.
You're so acclimated to the regulation, the regulating effect of that relationship
Yeah.
that you can't not do it. But what we're told by society is like, yeah, just like set your parameters on your phone. So it does it like time's up, but you can just hit
Right.
ignore and then you keep going. So we have all
Right.
these illusions of self control, and really what we're doing is getting sucked into this two-dimensional landscape, social landscape, by the AI in our phone that all of the applications hold. So like the algorithm, it's like it's doing what an AI would do. It's gathering all of your data. It's sensing pupil dilation. It's sensing perspiration. It's sensing facial expressions. It's coordinating that with time of
Heart
day and
rate and
previous
everything
habits.
from
And
your
yeah,
yeah.
and then it's giving you an ad for Postmates.
Right.
And you're like, I am kind of hungry. Your phone's like, yeah, I know you're hungry. That's why I'm giving you an ad for Postmates.
And isn't it ironic
And that
that
literally happens. That's not a conspiracy. That literally happens. Your
right.
phone takes all of that feedback and then sells that to an ad, and then the ad pops up on your phone because it knows it has a higher percentage of
Sure.
engagement with
It's
you at
almost
that
five
time on a
o'clock.
Thursday. Yeah, exactly.
Isn't it ironic that all these buzzwords like mindfulness and pausing and meditation and these kind of things are being pushed by technology. You get the app to teach you to be
Yeah.
mindful because the technology has made you unmindful.
Well, I'll put this prediction out there. You'll get the app to go to church soon. There's gonna be some really like the churches with the youth pastor that's like, we actually want engagement. We're actually not here to judge. Just come to church online.
Yeah.
Like we're all gonna be
Sure.
here. I'm gonna love on you. God's gonna be here with you.
Right.
So what are you gonna say to those Christians that refuse to go to church but that put on the goggles and go to church?
Sure.
Am I allowed to tell them that they're not going to church?
Right.
Like, but are they going? Like, honestly, are they going to church?
Right.
Because they're not literally going anywhere.
Right.
They're not actually seeing anybody. But you can put on the worldview that tells you,
Yeah.
I'm in church.
Right.
I'm hearing the pastor. I am listening. I'm feeling something. I'm in the chat. My friend is here. You're in that experience.
Right.
Now, it would almost feel like, what would you say to that person? What could you say to them that would get them to go to church when they're literally like, they're using the same words to describe what they're doing. I'm going to church.
Right.
And I'm thinking you're literally not going to church, but you're saying that you are. So then how can I come to you in love when I would have to challenge the words that you're using?
Yeah, and the paradigm, the schema they're operating from. There's like it is. I mean, it's a red pill kind of. You have to wake up to another world and redraw the boundaries and definitions
Yeah.
because otherwise we're using the same word church, but we have totally different meanings of what that is. I think we should this idea of community, the temple, the tabernacle, and the even that more prophetic, dark kind of storyline of the beast who gives breath to the image.
Mm-hmm.
These are I want let's head towards that in the next conversation.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we've done it for today, though.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always more to say, but
Right.
there always will be.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's good as always.